I'm getting it out of my system.
We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask why.
I'm Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
Hey, Gaia. Who's this lovely person sitting to my right? And also, what are we talking about?
So a couple weeks back, we had done a few episodes with our good friend Taya on making good hard games. It was primarily the topic of that one. The Dark Souls of podcast episodes, I think we called it. And now you can tell that I just edited that episode. So we thought, after doing a few more episodes on our own, that we would bring her back for Evil Week.
Woohoo! Evil Week.
Evil Week.
Evil Week, which we're recording on a beautiful day, so it feels a
It is
little
a
bit
very
wrong
nice
for it
day
to be
outside.
Evil Week. Or maybe we're just into contrast.
We are late on the Evil Week, though. We did originally plan for Evil Week to be last week. So last week was the Evil Week.
Well-
this week is the friendly, nice week where we record Evil.
Yes.
Last week was so truly evil that we didn't even get to record.
Yeah, we went, there's too much evil. The weather, not happening. And today we went,
The weather's too evil for us to
the
talk about
weather's too
evil.
evil. It's too, all of the too sad stuff. So
All
we're
of
going to
the too sad.
record the evil things on a nice day.
Yeah, so what happened when we had Taya on last time is we talked about openness in game design and difficulty. Why do people want to play hard games? After taking some time away and doing our Toys of Life episodes and our bonus content episode, we were like, hey, that was fun. Let's invite her back. So, Taya, hello. For those who haven't heard of you before, who are you?
Hi, I'm Taya, and I am a student of the art of play who asks why.
Oh,
Also,
fun.
Apparently, yes.
major fangirl of the show, so I'm excited to be
neat.
back, and I guess also resident Dark Souls girly, apparently.
Yeah, you've
Yeah.
been the Dark Souls girly
Yeah.
for a little bit now, haven't you?
So there's a reason I'm back for Evil Week, because Dark Souls.
Dark Souls, yeah. Much to my brother's chagrin, I'm afraid I'm not the Dark Souls girly.
Ah,
Yeah.
Disappointment.
lame. L.
L sad.
Elsa.
Guy, I have here in our notes that we're supposed to define morality. And I
Yes.
just want you to know what a monumental task to put into a 50-minute episode of
On
three
game
people in a radio station. Philosophers have debated this for thousands of years, and we're like,
You could do a
define
whole degree on
morality.
this.
Yeah, you could do a whole series of degrees on this.
You can,
and
all
then
the way to a
write,
PhD.
and then write several books
But you don't need to, because we're going to do it in 5 minutes.
in 5 minutes. Let me just
Wouldn't you like to learn a whole university's course of content in 5 minutes?
let me give you the crash course.
Horrible reference.
Not all games are moral. I think that's what you meant by this note, because there's a typo here.
There are there's
There's a-
multiple typos. Okay, so
and I just, not all games are moral, because that's not a question you can ask, apparently.
sorry. It's actually that I do know what that line's supposed to be. We're not going to be asking the question today. Is playing games moral? Right? Is there morality in games, not in terms
Oh,
of game
in
design,
doing the
in
gaming.
doing the activity? Right?
No,
No.
I should have put a quotation. This isn't our game's moral. This is
Yes.
how.
Yeah.
To kind of define this episode, for Evil Week, we wanted to talk about evilness in video games and realize that's just a discussion on morality systems, so we generalize it to morality. And then in the next episode, if you want to tune in for that, we're going to be talking about horror in game design. So, as Vi has alluded, we do have has directly said, we do have the question of what do we mean by morality in video games today. And broadly speaking, as Taya has done all of her research and I copied all of her notes into my own, quite literally, we're not today going to be asking, is there morality in playing games? For example, does playing shooter games turn your kids violent? Is not a question we're trying to answer today. The answer is no, but it's not our point to answer it. And there's no question on, can video games inspire good or evil in people? That is kind of what the game psychology episode was about. And if you want that, go listen to our episode with Matt McLean. That was great.
Yeah, and also some yes, some no. So go.
Yeah, broadly speaking, a game is not going to cause violence, but people who are prone to violence can use games as their source as much as they can use TV or other activities.
So we're more asking when there is morality within the story of games.
Yeah,
What
or
does
in the
that
game
look like?
mechanics,
Or in the
which
game
will be a big
mechanics.
part of today's discussion.
Yeah. Karmic dice, anybody?
Karmic dice.
Karmic dice. We are more talking about what happens within a game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can we talk about morality in games? Now, Taya has some good notes on this as well, but so I will just turn to you, Taya, and ask this. When we talk about the concept of morality, what really are we talking about?
I mean, my interpretation of us talking about the concept of morality has two pieces, right? It's morality as the theme of the game. Like if it's a game built around morality, like Persona, or it's a system that exists within the game to kind of either help or hinder the process of the game, and more of a mechanic, right?
Right.
Like morality as kind of a way of guiding or not guiding, giving the player options to make decisions.
Yeah. And when we say morality, what do we mean by just the word morality? I'm giving this task to you. Define morality for us.
Oh no. Hey, it's great that you're asking the person with a PhD, not in morality though.
Hey, your PhD is in psychology.
Loosely, my PhD from being 9 months old. Yeah, sure.
Your honorary PhD.
Honorary PhD. Sorry, I forgot that was a thing, and I was like, "What? Huh?"
Yeah, honorary
I was like,
PhD.
what are you talking about?
Taya is more qualified than I am from 9 months old, and I have
Yeah.
spent 24 years catching up.
Honorary. I think we need some context here. Honorary PhD from participating in a study as a child.
Yes.
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 PhD, that means absolutely nothing.
Has-
This does
Did-
mean Dr. Taya.
Did not actually. Fair point. Did not add to your knowledge base at all, though.
But you do have to call me Dr. Fazio.
Oh.
Next time you introduce me on the next episode.
Dr. Fazio.
Oh, Dr.
We have
Fazio.
Dr. Fazio, honorary PhD in psychology from 9 months old.
Yeah, that's the full
Maybe you
title.
should get you
have,
from psychology.
do you have to add? Hang on, I have two questions. Do you have to add from 9 months old? Is it required?
No.
Also, can you really add PhD to your like okay, you know when people sign off emails and they're like my name and then
PhD.
their degrees and stuff?
Yeah.
Do you use PhD? Because that's so funny. Because you could do what you could do is PhD and then in brackets on, right? HON, and that would be allowed. You
Wait,
could do
that's so
that.
based.
It's so good.
I think the technical answer is I could. There's also a level of the morality as to whether
Yeah.
I should.
I'm so glad that you picked that up. That's what I was leading.
Yeah.
I was hoping you would say about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the concepts of good and evil, effectively. Now,
To PhD or to not PhD.
that is the question. So, when we're talking about morality, we're really not talking about in this episode. We shall define morality from a philosophical standpoint. We can't, and also it's not important because that's up to the designer to deal with. More importantly, we're dealing with the idea of good versus evil, trying to do the right thing versus doing the wrong thing. And it's fundamental to what morality is, our concepts of good and evil as black and white boxes and as a gradient that we have to deal with. And how do games implement them? So Taya, I know that we have said that there are three main approaches to morality in games. Do you think you could run us through those?
Yeah, definitely. So the three main categories that kind of pop into my head and also pop into some of the research that I've looked at when you're defining morality are like the form of restrictive morality, which I would say is that very like black and white, good versus evil. Like I think about my playthroughs of Fable, where if you're making the explicitly evil decisions, like kick the little child, you grow horns as an evil dude.
Yeah, this could also be
Right.
Undertale with the good, like in Undertale, you're good or evil, effectively.
Yeah, and even within this restrictive morality system, it has branches as well. Like it can be explicitly like black and white, yes or no. And I think the D&D system also falls within that, where you are, like are still sitting within
The 9
the
alignments.
matrix of like explicit morality codes, right? So that's like the first category. Second category is contradictory morality. And I think that gets into like a deeper question of personal choices. So that's kind of when you're presented with potentially two good or potentially two bad decisions. And that's going to create some sort of internal conflict. And you have to kind of decide which is the lesser evil or the lesser good that you want to go with there.
Or if there even is a lesser evil versus the one that you prefer.
Totally, yeah. And I think of, again, like a really good example for that for me is like the ending of the first Dark Souls game, because as you play through all of Dark Souls, it's kind of building up this story of you wanting to relight the flame that kind of keeps this world system going. And you get to the end and you can choose whether you want to light the flame and kind of maintain the status quo or let it die out and change the status quo. And neither of them are a good or bad thing. They just have very different impacts. So that's up to the like player's decision.
Right.
And then the third category is cumulative morality, where kind of all the decisions that you have made up to a certain point have different impacts on the overall game world that you're living within. It's kind of a stacking of decisions.
Yeah. So this kind of covers our three ideas of morality we're going to be talking about today. So what is this episode going to look like? I have to imagine Vi, Taya, you two are curious, what are we going to do to organize this episode? The first thing we're going to actually talk about, and using our old structure from back in season 1 especially, we're going to ask the question, how do you screw this up? And we've said, and I think, Vi, you might remember us saying this in the past, that generally speaking, how do you screw up making a game? You don't do the good things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to morality, there are explicit ways to fail it. And that's going to be the beginning of our discussion is, how do you fail morality? And then what we're going to then go into is, how do you actually make the good system itself? Remember, the bad system is always a failure to make the good system, but there are things that can actively worsen it, and that's really what we want to talk about.
Yeah,
so,
in this case, there is a way to do this poorly, and it is not the case of don't do the good thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, if everyone's ready, let's go into how morality fails in games, or how games fail at making morality more accurately. So, before we start, I actually want to give a really important note for this section of the episode. We're about to talk about ways that you can fail at making a morality system, but importantly, these are not explicitly failures. They're failures at making a morality system. You can make a game about morality without having a morality system. You can tell a story about good versus evil without making the player choose between good or evil. The problem with these features is going to be when you do it wrong, and when you don't realize you're doing a limiting factor, you screw that up. And you can take, if you're trying to make a morality system, but everything is just good or evil, like Fable, for example, that can lead to a huge problem. But the exploration of is good good, is evil evil, where you don't need to make moral choices, you're exploring the idea of is black and white actually black and white, which Taya and I had like a 2-hour discussion on this last night. But we described Star Wars as a really good example of this, right? That can still be a good thing. But when you don't know you're doing it, that can be a problem. So let's dive into this. So, Vi, I'm going to toss over to you.
Hey.
Let's think about morality in writing and in game design for a second. How do you think this could go wrong? How could someone screw it up?
We're talking about how to present a dichotomy.
Yeah.
That is not well done.
Yeah.
I think if you're presenting a world in which there is black and there is white, you can't, like, the gray areas of it, shouldn't be sort of where you live, right? If you're going to do dichotomy, that's the whole point of it, is that there are two sides.
Right.
Right? But again, like, very complicated question, right? If you have that, then when you exist in the gray space, what happens, right? Because it can kind of become its own third space.
Yeah.
And that's not really what you want when you have a game like that.
Yeah. Actually, on this dichotomy, this dichotometric system, for example, what I wrote in my notes, that's not a word, by the way. Hey, Taya, I believe you've done some research on this.
I think one of the important questions with dichotomies, first off, is whether you want to do that at all, too, right? Like, there's an intentionality piece there because dichotomies kind of fail a lot of the time. A really common example of dichotomies failing is in Mass Effect 3 or any of the Mass Effect games, I believe, because the way that they build their morality system is effectively like within your dialogue interactions, you choose a good or a bad decision that are represented as Paragon or Renegade decisions, and then you get points that you can put into each like black or white decision, and those impact the way that you do dialogue, as like you get bonuses to charisma or you get bonuses to like deception kind of decisions. And it's very like separated black and white, but almost all the players that play through Mass Effect just do the good thing.
Yeah.
Because they've like the black and white, like opposite ends of a spectrum morality system generally just like pushes players to just pick the good thing anyway.
Yeah.
So then they lose that.
By not having the gray area.
Exactly.
Right? People are not going to choose the bad side, right? Because you've already shown a dichotomy where it's like, well, you can either be a Sith Lord who does horrible things to children, or you can be a Jedi and they're a lot cooler.
And not do horrible things to
and
children.
not do horrible things to children.
It's
you
like,
know? And it's like, and we draw a hard line there, you know? Do you want a red lightsaber or do you want the colorful ones, right? And
just
it's like,
broadly.
Broadly.
I love, actually, one of my favorite facts from what I know about Star Wars is I think the only reason that Mace Windu has a purple lightsaber is because the actor said, I want a purple lightsaber, and would not do the role otherwise.
I'm pretty sure that's true also. I've heard that.
Yeah, which is really funny. I really hope that's not a myth, because Taya and I did like a whole thing earlier today of debunking random myths. I really hope that's not a myth, because that's so funny. But yeah, these systems of this is good, this is evil, pick one, it's just not how morality works in real life. It's not hard to do a good thing in real life. It's hard when there isn't a good thing in real life.
It's hard when you don't know what the explicitly good thing is.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, I think we'd all just choose,
Good.
broadly.
Broadly.
I think we'd all just choose the good thing. Right?
Yeah. And it's not realistic to real life either, because when you go through your day-to-day life, you don't have a pop-up menu that says, this is the good thing, this is the bad thing, pick one.
This is the thing I've really enjoyed about, like, I'm going to talk about Baldur's Gate 3 more, but you're constantly making decisions that are so conflicting, right? Like, on my first run, I was like, I'm going to play this as a good character, right? I was like, I'm going to choose good options when they come up. And then every option, it was like, well, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. Like, I'll be like, okay, this seems like the best decision. And then you end up in a situation because of that decision where something else bad is happening. And you're like, I caused that, even though I don't know the end result. And like, that is more real life, right? You make the best decisions you can when you see them, and they have consequences, and you don't get to know what the consequences are.
Yeah. Right? And I do have some notes on this as well of it's not always wrong to present morality as black and white, because sometimes what you want to do is explore the people in these systems. For example, a lot of more modern Star Wars media has been like, okay, so here's how the Jedis do things that are wrong. Despite the fact that they're fighting for good, here's how they screw it up. And here's the Sith doing good things because they generally believe in good but are on the evil side of the Force.
Yeah, and it's also like, where does your understanding of good and evil come from if you are like a Sith Lord, right? If you're like, oh, we do order because it makes sense, that's good.
Yeah.
If you were like, this is any human experience. If you're raised in a particular kind of culture and that's, the norm for you, you think that is the good thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? That's your norm. And then if somebody else acts a different way because they're under a different set of circumstances and understandings, you can interpret that as bad, but doesn't necessarily mean that it is.
Yeah. An approach to simplistic morality that is actually beneficial is sometimes it's good to say, let's do a yin-yang approach. What is the good within evil? What is the evil within good? Asking, like, I think of Lord of the Rings a lot for one side of this, is the Lord of the Rings is about, here's ultimate evil, here's the good guys stopping it, and here's every evil thing these good guys do, how they handle crises, and how they morally fail each other constantly. Mm-hmm. And that's just fundamental to the Lord of the Rings. It is an exploration of the evil in good.
Yeah.
And that's a good design, but when you want a morality system and then you present morality as this simplistic, here's good, here's evil, well, you're not making a morality system. You're making a story of good or evil. And if you wanted to make morality and you're calling it morality and then it's good versus evil, you get a Mass Effect 3.
You have to have conflict within what you're talking about for there to be two sides.
Yeah.
Right?
Or even at the very least, don't pretend to be making an actual morality system if you're not.
Yeah, the crux is the theme and the story about exploring morality, and then you're using a basic system to kind of be the foundation of that and then explore deeper concepts.
Yeah.
Or are you using morality as a piece in a different narrative?
Yeah. Are you using it kind of as part of the framework as like, okay, well, we need to have two sides, so we'll call one good and one bad. That's not what the story's about. Story is about what this one guy does, to do things, right?
Yeah.
There's some morality there, but it's not front and center. You're not making choices about it, thinking about it as a player.
This really leads into my second point of what I've called in my notes underused morality or infamy systems. And this is the idea that sometimes a big problem with a lot of games is they say, okay, well, we want a game about this, but people like to be good or bad. Here, have a morality system for fun. And then they just make a morality system that's effectively meaningless. I think, Taya, you have some good notes on this one.
I mean, I have the list again, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't want to, throw so much infinite shade on Fable, because I really like Fable, honestly, as a concept, but I think that the way that they approach their morality system is very much that. It's like, your character's appearance changes a little bit based on your moral decisions, and that's the only consequence of your moral decisions.
So you could just make really bad moral decisions because you're like, I think he looks cool when he's fully evil.
And actually a lot of people do when they play through, because they're like, I want the big epic evil aesthetic, right? And I think even to a certain extent, maybe not like the structure of Baldur's Gate, but like the D&D system fails with that a little bit too, because people struggle with that concept of like doing an evil run. Like, what does that mean? Does it mean I'm gonna like drop kick every single character I interact with, or is there like nuance in that system, right?
Yeah. It's the when you're playing like the Dark Urge like origin, right? Do I give in to every violent impulse, or is that actually good because I'm being given the option to do that? Because I don't know where it comes from. Is that better?
Yeah. It's a better system because it has more nuance and it gives you that flexibility there, but it's open to how the player's interpreting it. And you can interpret it in a way that makes your morality system boring because you're just like, oh, well, it's just black and white, one decision again.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think when you play D&D at the table, I think you run into the moral quandaries a lot more, where they're just like, or maybe not more, but you and the people at your table tend to fall in the same sort of like ways of thinking about things.
I'm hearing murder hobos in my head.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, if we all do that, then it's the right choice, right?
But that's not really making a meaningful impact either, right? Like, that's not a hard choice to make. And I think one of the best things about morality systems is when it poses a hard choice.
Yeah. Something I do really enjoy is when you're faced with things that's like, I don't know what the right answer is.
Exactly.
Right?
And you could make a case for either one, right? Like, you and another person playing through the game might have completely different perspectives on what the right choice was in that decision and can argue that, and that's okay, and that's honestly a good thing.
Because it's part of the game. It's the whole point, I would maybe argue, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is not, okay, well, we kind of need there to be morality. This is like, no, we're playing in the space of making choices about what is good and bad.
And that's intentional again, I think, there too, with that piece, right? Like, if the point of you building your morality system is to make the players kind of question their thinking, that's pretty cool.
Then you're cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's how you would do it well in a game, right? Because again, we're talking about this not being like, if you don't do morality system, it's bad. No, you can do a morality system and it not be good, like what I'm hearing about Fable, right? Like, not to throw a whole bunch of shade on a game I haven't played, but like, you can just use it as a tool and call it morality, and that's not great. Or you can live in the space that is developing morality and understanding choices.
Yeah. And if I can jump in, there's another really good example from my experiences about a game failing at its morality system. Back when I was younger, I played the game Life is Strange. Now, I have fun stories about this game. I think I might have had a real-life heart attack when playing this game and went to the hospital, came back, and continued playing. A few days later I continued playing. Like,
the game is that intense, eh?
Love the game. But there's a point in the game, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the ending for those who don't want to hear the ending of the original Life is Strange. It is over 10 years old at this point. Just skip like a minute forward. But in Life is Strange, you make a lot of decisions of, are you trying to help people? Are you doing good versus bad? And the game keeps track of those decisions. And they do affect some interactions in the story later on, but broadly speaking, the story stays the exact same, and you get the same one of two endings. And for those two endings, your options are let your friend die who spent this whole game trying to save them, right? Or keep them alive and let the world start crumbling, right? Because you're screwing up the timeline so significantly to keep this one person alive who gets shot early in the game. And the thing is, no matter what you do, you're given this decision at the end. So a lot of players actually had this issue where it's like, okay, I spent all this time being moral, all this time building morality, and it's the same decision. Like, those decisions changed if this one character would be friendly to me later. Mm-hmm. And that change is ineffective because they will still do the thing I need them to do to progress the story. They're just going to do it angrily rather than friendly. Who cared about the morality? There's no consequences.
Yeah, your choice didn't actually matter.
Right? And it's okay for a game with its morality to say, okay, we're going to do the same ending no matter what. Like, you're still doing the same story, just you're good or bad in it. And, like, there are good examples of that. That's how the morality system of The Walking Dead works. Fundamentally, the morality system of The Walking Dead is, are you going to have people with you who are going to save your life, or are you going to struggle at the end? But that fundamentally impacts the gameplay at that point in time. In Life is Strange, it really didn't, like, at all. You still got to the same ending. It's just, were you friendly or mean, right? The same people like you, the same people don't like you. It's just, very frustrating. And I think this is also an issue that occurs or a similar issue occurs in BioShock, if Taya, you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I was just itching to talk about BioShock in this context because I think the Life is Strange thing kind of, like, it is a victim of twofold things, like, issues existing there, right? Like, for one thing, it's happening at the end of the game, so you have no consequences to play through. And then the second thing is, like, as you play through Life is Strange, none of the decisions you're making as you're interacting with the world are that big and meaningful. And I think that's something that BioShock, which is kind of weird to think about as a concept, because BioShock is a game about morality and about psychology, like to a certain heavy extent. But when you're playing through BioShock, it tries to present these decisions for the player that seem like they should be really heavy and meaningful. Like when you're interacting with the little sisters and you get the option to kill them, like that seems like it should be a really big deal. You're like, this is a little girl. This is gonna have huge world gaming consequences, and it doesn't. You could just kill the little girls, and if you choose to keep them alive and like have the harder morality decision, you just lose a little bit of, I can't remember what the stat thing is, but it's like an XP thing. But you gain so much of it through your playthrough that you may as well just save the little sisters because there's no consequences to the player.
I think if you're going to present a difficult choice, right, then
Make it difficult?
Make the choice difficult, but also make the rewards or consequences equally rewarding or consequential. Right?
Side note for BioShock, bit of a spoiler for those listening again, 10 seconds this time. In BioShock, if you save the little sisters and don't ever break the morality, near the end of the game, they give you a reward that is better than if you had killed them. So what was the point?
Yeah, like there's no hesitation really for the player unless you're like doing the D&D thing where you're like, I want to drop kick everything. Like there's no reason for you to want to kill them.
You can only be evil if you just want to be evil.
Yeah.
Because there's no hard choice there. There's no like major consequences. It doesn't majorly change your narrative experience in the game, and there's no like meaningful reason to want to kill them other than just for the sake of it.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And this kind of lets me go into my final point now as well for failing at making morality systems. Again, what we've discussed at this point isn't that you fail at making a morality system because you do these things, but because you do these things and then call it a morality system. You can do these things well, and my next example is really going to go into that, and that's explicit morality codes. Earlier, we talked about dichotometric morality, which is the whole black and white, that's it problem of good, evil, no gray area. The other issue, though, which came up a few times, especially when talking about Fable, I think you mentioned, is the idea that this is the bad decision. This is the good decision. This is the selfish but ultimately not bad decision. And it's like, option A is always good. Option B is always Option C is always evil. This explicit code of this is evil, this is good. Do you want to be evil? Do you want to be good? And there's some good examples of how to do this right. Again, you can do this well. And I think Undertale is my favorite example of that. Undertale is not a game with a morality system. Fundamentally, a lot of people say this is a morality game, and it is. It's a story about morality. But the whole point of Undertale is how far are you willing to go to not kill someone? Like, how much are you willing to struggle? And when you kill someone, the game slams into you constantly saying you killed them for convenience. That's not a morality system. No. That's a story about morality. The whole point of the game is, can you not do that? Or are you so evil that you hunt them down until there's none left?
The game is pressuring you to adhere to a certain morality system rather than letting you decide.
Yeah, but that's not bad. A game can, like, there's a good question to be asked in video games. How far are you willing to go to not kill someone?
Yeah, I think that's different. There is a question that the game is thematically asking versus a morality system where you have consequences. Like, if the game is shaped around understanding morality, we're asking a fundamentally different question about morality broadly than does it include a morality system where you must, deal with choices.
And this comes back to Mass Effect. You have the Paragon skill tree and the Renegade skill tree. Which skill tree do you want to go down?
It's just skill trees.
Good, evil.
Yeah.
Good, evil. We actually had we've had many discussions on skill trees in the show, and our end point has always been kind of bad.
Yeah.
Like, skill trees are such a good tool, and it's so easy to screw them up. And making your morality skill tree based is, admittedly, really funny. Like, conceptually, it's hilarious.
It's wild. Like, if I was designing how, like, my brain worked, and I was like, oh, you know what would be cool? Every time I make a good choice, I get more powerful. Right? Like,
you get more powerful
slash good. Like those two things being related, we're no longer asking about morality. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're no longer asking about choices. We're asking about what power up do you want, and so how do you treat a person? Like, sometimes
being evil gives you deception skill points. I'm going to
kill. I'm going to say a thing.
I want to deceive, I must kill.
You gamified your morality.
Look.
I just it isn't the maybe the right question to ask in some scenarios, right? If you use your morality choices as power-ups, you're going to force people's hands to choose different ones and then to get stuck in those ones, right? If you spend the first half of your playthrough doing a bunch of good choices because you like the good outcomes on the skill tree, but then later you're like, oh man, except that maybe this had consequences and now I need to be, I want to make a different choice, but I now don't have the skills on my skill tree to make that other choice.
Also, I have played
stuck.
games with more morality-based skill trees, and very often the good skill tree is here's the skills that make you good at dialogue, and the evil skill tree is here's the skills that make you good at combat. And the game requires combat to progress, so if you're being a good person, you just nonstop debuff yourself.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the question of how far are you willing to go to not kill someone. Here's the problem. Undertale's about that. The game that I played wasn't.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's quite literally the plot of Star Wars The Force Awakens, like that game. I played the 1 and 2, and both of them kind of bad. I enjoyed them when I was like a 14-year-old kid, and now that I'm 24, I've looked at them again and was like, oh, this is black and white morality, and you have to be evil to get all the really cool combat bonuses, or at least the fun ones, which means if you want to be a good person, you have to surrender your power fantasy, which why are you playing games then? Aren't power fantasies kind of normally the point? Didn't Zoe Quinn do like a whole hour-long rant that caused the entire Gamergate scandal because of that?
I mean, I think that like when we ask what do you do to make it good, here's what I'm going to suggest. Divorce your power system from your morality system. They shouldn't be related. You have a narrative structure where you make moral choices or immoral choices, and also you get powerful.
Yeah, in D&D you can still fireball if you're a good person.
Yes. You don't have to be a good person to cast fireball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this does lead really well into the next segment of this episode, which is going to take up until about the end now. Okay. So we've found a bunch of qualities that are good moral questions, not good morality systems in games. So how do we build a good morality system in a game? Like, how do we actually now approach building one that's good?
Like, if we consider we've already divorced power and morality from each other, now what do you do about the morality question?
Yeah. How do we build a morality system if we want to actually explore morality mechanically rather than story-wise? And my first point on this, I think, is really good. Most of the time, don't.
Yeah.
Very seriously, if you don't need the gameplay itself to be exploring morality, good versus evil, and the player themselves struggling, you don't need to do that.
If you don't need to gamify your morality, don't. Leave it to the narrative.
Like, you can make morality great, but as well, it's okay to make a story where the character deals with morality and the player plays through that character. But the player doesn't need to deal with morality. Like, this is a really good example. Like, again, Undertale, Star Wars, a lot of examples I've given previously. Like, it's okay to say we don't need a morality system. We need a story about morality, and that's different. And this kind of goes to my second point as well, and I called this careful underuse of morality, and I don't remember why I wrote that, so I'm going to read my section. But as I was saying, every example of how it fails is an example of how it can be successful when your game is not using morality, but is about morality. I put a few other examples here. Persona is fundamentally, that's all Persona is, a game about morality, right? Persona 3 is a game about understanding and coming to terms with death. Persona 4 is to come to terms with the truth and in a world where people fundamentally lie and you're trying to find out those lies, right? And Persona 5 is a game about rebellion, understanding that there are power structures in place that are fundamentally failing and you have to fight against them because they failed you. You don't need a morality system in those games. Those games are studying morality. Like, it's more like a philosophy course than it is like a philosophy test.
Yeah.
Except that it has explicit philosophy tests in the game, too.
No, besides that, yes, you do have to take a philosophy test in Persona 5. It's great. But I do have other examples.
Imagine school, but it's in your video game that you play in your free time when it's not about school.
But hey, immersion.
It is immersive.
I guess. Yeah, I think, again, just if you are going to make a game and you want to explore morality, you can do that in the narrative structure.
Yep.
You have to question whether or not it's necessary for it to become part of the mechanics of the game.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a really good example of this as well, which is Spec Ops: The Line that I want to talk about. Massive trigger warning. For about 2 minutes now. The scene I'm talking about this game is the white phosphorus scene. For those who know about that, they know if they want to skip it. Those who don't, war crime trigger warning. Cool. So in Spec Ops: The Line, that is a game where you're playing. It's a traditional brown shooter style where it's like, deserty cameras, very dark, very little color in the games, and shooter, right? But the whole point of the game is you're in a war zone as part of a scouting team that got separated, and you're trying to survive your way out. And your character is making these decisions that seem to be good, but you're getting hints from the other characters that the results are actually really negative. And there's a point where you get to an area where it's like, listen, we have a bombing device. There's a bunch of enemies there. You literally can't approach without dying. This uses white phosphorus. You have to drop it on them. And you can't avoid the scene. You fundamentally can't avoid it. And so eventually you have to drop the white phosphorus, which is a war crime, right? And the group that you drop it on is not combatants. That is a refugee camp. You have to gas a refugee camp in this game, right? And the thing is, this game has been one of the greatest lessons of morality and how people struggle to do the right thing in hard times and how doing the right thing can hurt a lot of people, right? And this is explicitly a moment where the game is like, you were lied to. You were lied to and you did something, and now you have to live with the fact that you pressed the button.
Yeah.
Right? Are you okay with that? And that's a great story about morality, and that's not a morality system. It's okay to tell a story about morality, right? Like
It's okay to explore hard choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And so now that we've kind of covered, and it's been less than 2 minutes, but good. No more discussion on war crimes. So we now know when to not make a system and when it's okay to not make that system because you don't need it. Okay, now you want the player to deal with morality as a mechanic and not have clear-cut morality. No black and white systems, no explicit codes, no underuse systems. You want morality in your game. You've decided it. What do you do? And you've looked at me, Vi. I have to imagine you have things.
Well, I think the framing of this makes it hard to answer. I think the better question is, when do you decide you're going to use it? When do you decide that it is a mechanic, right?
Yeah.
What does it bring to your game in a positive way that requires that it is part of decisions that you make, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's no longer about, am I making the right choice on a hard thing? It's about putting points in buckets because of choices that you make.
It's a tool in the toolkit for the
Yeah.
game. I think there's a lot of answers that you could give for that too. Like, you can use it effectively as an immersion tool, right? It makes your player feel like they're in the player because you're making decisions and those decisions have consequences, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a pretty effective tool.
It helps to teach a very personal lesson to
Yep.
the player. Actually, talking about our game on our episode on openness, it is a fundamental way to create this sense of openness in a very effective way if you're trying
Yeah.
to create like an open game.
And to teach a non-specific lesson,
Yeah.
right? If you frame your narrative as you just talked about in your last example, right? Like, this is a choice and this is what maybe you should learn from it. If you just go open and you say, hey, you can make any choice and the consequences of it will happen, and then you have to deal with it and you have to decide how you feel about it. We don't touch like the meta of it, of maybe you should feel this way. We just let you feel that way.
Yeah, and I think people do genuinely enjoy battling these really hard problems. I think that's a big theme in Baldur's Gate 3 as just a game. Like, Baldur's Gate 3
Yeah.
is huge in the whole let you deal with very difficult things. This is the same reason why people talk about the trolley problem so much online. I know it's a super basic example, but fundamentally, people like it because that is a hard question. Would you do nothing and let someone be harmed, or would you actively do something to decrease the harm but cause someone new to be harmed? Like, that's a question in morality, and I think that's a good question to ask.
And I think it's
hard.
memorable too, right? Like, I think when I think back to different games that I've played, some of the most memorable moments in the game are points where they are like genuinely stressing you out because
Yeah.
you have to decide, what am I going to do here?
Yeah, it's and especially like also like timed dialogue. Like, have you ever had those where you have to make a decision within 10 seconds because it's
Oh my god.
yeah, The Witcher 3 does this. So you'll be in a quandary and you can't just sit there and be like, well, if I do this, then maybe that, and I think this is the right choice. You don't get to because the character doesn't get to. So it's like very much like immersion. You are that character and you're making that decision now because they're making it now.
And that's an interesting, unique use case for the question of like pressuring the player's choices there too, because now you're living with the consequences of your split-second decision in the world of the game.
This is going to come up also in our horror episode next, is the idea of creating tension meaningfully.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're like Baldur's Gate, for example, right? You can mull over that decision for as long as you like, right? You can sit there and be like, I don't know, is option 1 or option 3 better?
Yeah.
Right? And then, with the addition of you have to make a skill check, right? So you can either do maybe the dialogue option that you want, but you're very, like, you maybe aren't very likely to succeed doing it, or you can do the thing you're most likely to succeed doing and tap into some other powers you don't really want to touch, or, use explicitly, like, deception.
Yeah. And so how do we create a good morality system? We have hit one big point already, and it's the first point on my list, is create a world that has morality in it, right? Make sure the world accepts the morality decisions and reacts to it, and that the player knows this. Baldur's Gate 3 is good because when you do something wrong or evil, or you screw up your morality system, or even if you're not even there's something wrong, but there's just both decisions are equal, someone dies, someone hurts, like someone's pain, like there's no easy way out. Something's happening.
There are consequences for both intentional and unintentional good and evil actions.
There's also short-term consequences of something happens here and now, and something will happen further down the line also.
Yeah. Right? Like, sometimes these people are just doing what they can to survive, but they're harming you in the process. Are you willing to harm them back? Right? And that's a good question. But also, when making a good system, and this is the big second point, is a very show don't tell. Vi, you just mentioned how sometimes you have consequences immediately, sometimes you have consequences down the line.
Yeah.
They don't tell you, oopsie,
No.
you did an evil.
You did an evil.
Right? Like,
could you imagine, like, just a little, like, how, like, it's like Astarion approves or whatever. It's like, you did an evil.
Yeah.
Or if there was, like, an
this.
alignment meter of, like, that stepped you toward evil, you'd be like,
I've played a game with an alignment meter that does that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't remember the game now, but it was like, you do an evil thing and it's just like, tick.
It's wild to me because you get instant feedback that isn't, like, within
Real.
the world.
Yeah, and
right?
it's jarring. I mean, for one thing, when you're like, it's not realistic. When you're living through your regular day-to-day life, you don't have a pop-up menu.
You don't have the pop-up thing. You don't have a little
you did an
tick.
evil.
You did an evil. Yeah. Sorry, let me just, on my political compass of alignment. Oh, just stepped into the lawful territory. Oops.
I have to go back to chaos. Time to go commit crimes.
Sorry, I was trying to hang out in true neutral, but
lawful neutral. I'm sorry.
lawful neutral. Oops.
Oopsie.
So all of these being an oops and not a good job is really funny. Like,
Yeah.
any way you step, it's like, ooh. I think also, like, sorry, I'm just thinking about this now, but Baldur's Gate 3, right, when you make the best choices, you know that, like, there are people around you, your companions, who might not agree with that choice, but they all have very different interpretations that you can understand of what
Except
you're
Astarion.
doing. No, Astarion, great.
I don't like Astarion.
I love him a
I have
lot. He's
actively,
very good.
in my single player run, I am actively going to kill him.
That's worrying to me. Because I enjoy him a lot because he's just chill. I mean, he's not, but I understand the way he is, right? But you understand why the choices you make, like, you can choose to make a choice for a character, right? You can choose to, especially when you touch their backstories, right? You can choose to let them run their own backstory or influence their decision based on, what you've done to relate yourself to them.
It's a good piece of the world existing kind of as its own separate entity. Like the NPCs in Baldur's Gate have their own intentions and motives, but they are reactive to your moral decisions, and it's built into how you interact with the world. That's a great thing.
It's a really great system, and it's so cyclical, which is also really nice, right?
If I can talk about something in Baldur's Gate 3 I don't like, though. I actually really don't like that when you do something good or bad, sometimes you get X character likes this or X character does not like this. I don't like that. But there was a scene where I did, like, I was in a goblin area in the Underdark. Can't give too much detail because spoilers, and Taya is in the room having not made it there yet.
Uh-oh.
And
Oopsie.
I made, like, there's a point where they are doing I think, slavery in that region. And I was trying to like deceive them. So I was going to be like, okay, I'm going to pretend to want to be part of this so I can get in. And I clicked that button.
Yeah.
And then Will immediately stopped me and was like, I am not okay with you doing this. If you take another step towards that, I am going to stab you.
Oh,
And
wow.
like, there was no Will disapproves. It swapped my dialogue over to Will and said,
Oh,
and
interesting.
he actively said, I can't believe you're this bad of a person.
Oh, wow.
Right?
I haven't encountered anything like that.
Yeah, well, because I thought I was going to be a deception thing, and then it
Yeah.
wasn't. So the fact that it wasn't means
Yeah.
my character was actively endorsing slavery.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing is, that I liked a lot more. That's actually one of my favorite times that Baldur's Gate breaks away from this likes this, dislikes this.
Yeah.
Because a character literally said, I'm not okay with you doing this. You're fundamentally being a horrible human being. I hope this is a moral slip up and you never do it again.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Right?
Yeah.
And even though we're talking about show, don't tell, and this is very much telling, I'm getting a consequence right away.
Right away.
Right away, one of my team members is like, oh my God.
Yeah, or don't do that.
No,
yeah.
like that?
Yeah. or
No.
No. I think this is also interesting because on my first playthrough, I had 2 characters in my party, and the decisions I made, one of the characters like consistently approved with, just happened to be aligned to those choices, right? And one of them was like, don't do that. Disapproves. And then I was like,
Asterion.
no, Lazelle. I was like, and she never ever approved on stuff I was doing, and I was like, I just like, I don't want to fight them. I don't think everybody is evil. Like, so I ended up not doing any of her storyline basically for the first run. I was like, I don't enjoy having you in the party, so I don't progress your storyline, and so you actually miss out on pieces of storyline as your morality decisions change, which I also think is cool because you can then go back and go, did I miss something? What decision did I make that changed the way I saw that?
Yeah, I think there's a preference system there too. Like, my interpretation of the purpose of the playing of Baldur's Gate is very much like, I want to exist in this D&D world and I want to interact with characters. That's not true for everyone. I think that's just like how a lot of us kind of see that experience.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that like that necessitates having, like, it's not really a game about like the major impacts pervading from your moral decisions, right?
Again, not about morality, but has big morality questions.
Yeah, like it's utilizing the system to tell a different story, and that story is often just like your interpersonal relationships with the world and other characters, which I think it does well. But like the system as a whole is sometimes icky because it does almost pressure you, or rather like the motivations of the other characters you're interacting with pressure you to make certain decisions.
So what's your read on why Baldur's Gate chose to like make that a mechanic and less like, so we've talked about, you can have morality as part of your narrative, right? Or you can have it as part of your power system. Don't have it as part of your power system, but then you have the question of, do we make it a mechanic or leave it in narrative? Why do you think they made the choice to pull it out of their narrative to make a mechanic? Aside from the fact that D&D kind of already does this a little bit.
I actually kind of struggle to answer that because I don't like it as a mechanic
Sure.
in Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
I don't like that it's so explicit about like every decision you make is interacting with this NPC, like explicitly with the pop-up saying like, oh,
Yeah.
this character didn't like this.
Yeah.
I wish there was a little bit more nuance where like you're playing through the game and the characters like bring up later in like your dialogue like, hey, you did this thing earlier that wasn't very cool, which they do, but like paired with the pop-ups it feels like a little bit less natural,
less
So this might actually lead to a better second question. Why would you want it to be even more deep in the morality system? Why is it that you want an even deeper morality system in Baldur's Gate 3?
I think it's just a more interesting question. Like, it's a more interesting way to interact with the game world because then I guess it feels more impactful at that point rather than like, I feel like that pop-up interaction is kind of metagaming how your relationships are with the characters, which is fine because a lot of the time you want that control in Baldur's Gate. If you're like, yo, I want to romance this character.
Yeah.
I want to understand like how to do this playthrough well so that I can accomplish that goal. Like, it makes it easier for you, but it doesn't feel as real, as immersive.
Yeah, you do lose a lot of the immersion when you're like, oh, if I make this choice, I bet Shadowheart will like that.
Yeah.
It's a very different way to play the game, right? Like I said, like doing that first playthrough and making choices where I thought it was the right choice and then having characters be like, I disapprove. And it was like, well, that I'm making the best choice because that's what I think we should be doing, right? later we can have a conversation about it, but having the pop-up does really kind of ruin that.
Yeah. Like, I like it in a sense of, like, it is almost realistic because when you're interacting with real human beings, like, they are potentially going to react. Like, they're going to be reactive about your decisions, but maybe not, like, pop-up.
Pop-up. They're, but I think it's also just a way of saying, like, because when you're having an interaction with a person, if they disapprove, you're going to get a physical response of, like, making a noise or being, like, saying something off the side that isn't part of a conversation you're having. I think it's also just sort of a shortcut for the game development of, like, we don't have to, like, cut to somebody folding their arms and looking grumpy. We can just say, approves, disapproves, to just make that dialogue shorter and to, use our resources a little bit better.
I agree. And there's so many moving pieces in Baldur's Gate. It makes sense that they're like, this is not really, like, the main focus of the game necessarily, so it doesn't need to be a big deal.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, that would be so cool. Could you imagine your characters, like, crossing their arms and making, like, a disapproval noise?
Face? Yeah.
Instead of the, like, the Lae'zel disapproves.
I think it would also be, like, I think there's a time management thing, too, of, like, do you always need to cut to the character? But I do like the idea of characters just being, like, like, from off screen. You just, like, but I think also, like, in Baldur's Gate, in the meta, that the companions are going to go along with you kind of no matter what you do, because they all have goals that lead you the same way, right? It's the question that a lot of D&D games come up with, which is, like, why are all of these characters traveling together, right? What stops you from just breaking away from the group? And it's like, well, we all have goals and we're all going the same way, so whatever choice that one person makes, well, stick around. I mean, it's fine. I don't like it, but I'm going to keep doing it. And you know that because you're playing a game where that happens.
Yeah. As well, for just, like, some final notes on morality, like, how do you do it right? I had a section of my notes. I have to figure out exactly what I wrote on it. I wrote, explore and exploit the tension of ethical and difficult decisions.
It's a good line.
It is. And I think this kind of goes into why, for example, Taya, you were saying why you want more morality systems in, like, Baldur's Gate 3. You want it to be even more explicit in its morality system, because exploring difficult decisions is fun. Like, the whole point of a lot of games is to explore conflict. Making these hard decisions is a form of conflict. People want to explore it. And I have some notes here. I hate to be bringing up Fallout New Vegas again, but in Fallout New Vegas, there's a point where you're just outside the New Californian Republic, and there's a series of farmers who are part of the Republic who were promised to get water to grow their crops from pipes, and it's just not arriving, right? And, like, they need this water to survive. But just outside of the borders, not too far away, there are people who are siphoning water off, who are generally discriminated against by the Republic and don't have any real options, who are stealing the water because they need it to grow their crops to survive. It went so far as a ranger from the Republic went to explore what was happening, and one of the leaders of this siphoning group killed him. Now, this sounds pretty easy, don't give them the water, but he also very expressly, like, states that he didn't want to do it, and he feels guilty, and it's eating him up inside, and there's a whole scene where he's like, he feels bad and wishes he didn't do it. Right? So what do? If you do nothing, those farmers inside the Republic are not going to meet their crop quota and are going to have their livelihoods destroyed and might actually risk their own health. But if you take the water away, this other group, which is discriminated against by the Republic, has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And not making a choice is a choice. What do?
Yeah.
Right?
It's trolley problem all over again.
Yeah. And there's another example from New Vegas. Again, really good example of this. I can't believe it's at the end of the episode I'm saying this, but this is where I wanted to say it, right? There's a group in New Vegas known as the Khans, who are a series of raiders that are generally very aggressive. And if you choose to work with a group called Caesar's Legion, which is just one of the two major factions, they will eventually tell you, go destroy the Khans, they keep attacking us, right? But if you go to destroy the Khans and you meet them, a bunch of them are going to tell you how they're with the Khans partially because their family was destroyed and tortured by Caesar's Legion. And they're raiding and being aggressive because of this, right? So, and, like, yeah, they're aggressive. They're raiders, don't get me wrong. But they're not, like, their level of cruelty is far below the group that you're working with. But they still are cruel. But do they deserve to be destroyed for it? Like,
Yeah.
this is a hard question. And like,
What justification makes the most sense to you?
yeah.
Yeah.
And overall, yeah, this is how to create a good system. A
Yeah.
relevant world, showing the morality, exploring tension. A good morality system is built on these things. And that brings us about to the end of the episode. We've covered pretty much all of our examples, and we're about 55 minutes in, so this is right around where we usually stop. So,
Cool.
Woohoo!
yeah, as always, I want to thank you both for coming on today to talk about morality in games. Thank you so much for Taya, who wrote almost all of the notes that I used for this episode. All of my notes come from a discussion with her while reading her notes.
Just saying, the PhD really does come in handy.
It comes in handy. It's great. It's great. We love
Also-
it.
I want you to start signing off your emails with PhD. I'm like obsessed with it now. I think it's so
Please.
funny.
Also, I love that like the morality discussion falls within Evil Week, because there is a real question of like which is more the episode that fits Evil Week, like
Yeah.
the horror games episode or the morality episode.
Being evil or games about evil things.
and
What's
I
more
think
evil?
morality like really touches on an interesting piece of like what does evil even mean and how is that reflected, and I just hope that like we see that explored more, because when it's done well, like Fallout
it's
New
good.
Vegas shows,
It's
it can
good.
be really good.
Yeah. Well,
So-
that tells us what we're talking about next time. So
Yeah.
tune in next week to hear us
Spoilers.
talk about horror.
Horror. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good one.
Bye.
And that's it for today's episode. But what if you wanted to listen to more? Well, our new episodes come out every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic, and there are 3 different ways that you can listen. If you're in the Fredericton area of New Brunswick, Canada, you can listen live on CHSR 97.9 FM through any of your radio services. If you're not in this region or you prefer using the internet, you can tune in on chsrfm.ca at the same time, 9 p.m. Atlantic. As well, we release all of our episodes on a number of podcasting platforms online, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. So if you wanted to, you could go back right now and listen to Season 1, where Vi and I do a deep dive into the fundamental concepts of game design, rather than the hardware they'll be taking up this season. Anyways, thank you for listening, and have a good one.